Hey, it's Matt from Hidden Machine here, and today I want to share a new kind of video. It's somewhere in between an essay and a review. I want to speak about a game, and then I want to talk to someone involved in making that game. So that's what we're going to do here today with a game called Beyond Crimson Stars. Let's get into it. At this point in time, the argument over whether or not video games qualify as art is a very tired one. Still, it's not really a qualification that's been universally accepted. Between players, publishers, developers, designers, and the people just passing by, games can be a sport, a simple pastime, a product, a paycheck, a nuisance, and whether or not games in general, or any singular game, can be art or have artistic merit is still extremely subjective. And ultimately, as the internet continues to segment and divide many of us into countless little microcultures, all with different values and perspectives, it really isn't worth arguing about. So I'm not here to argue. If you think a game is art, then under the broad definition of art, it's probably art. And going along with that line of thinking, there are a lot of games that I see as art games, and for whatever reason, these games rarely seem to break out into any sort of mainstream success. I would guess that it's because these games often challenge or clash with the common preconceived notions of what a video game is supposed to do. I mean, a lot of the games that I'm thinking of don't even really fit the dictionary definition of a game, per se. Recently, I've seen a lot of influencers online posting pictures from these giant art installations. A lot of these are produced by a company called Meow Wolf, which describes their work as immersive multimedia experiences that transport audiences of all ages into fantastic realms. Essentially, you walk around a cool-looking place and you interact with cool shit. That's kind of a crude and simple way of describing these installations, but it's not totally inaccurate, and it's also a somewhat fitting description for the main subject of today's video, Beyond Crimson Stars. I get that walking through a massive art installation that can appeal to all of your senses at once isn't quite the same thing as sitting down at your PC and playing through an indie art game. But I do see a lot of similarities between the two experiences, and given the success and popularity of some of these installations, I think they can set a sort of reference point for people who might be struggling to understand the appeal of a game where you pretty much just walk around for an hour. Beyond Crimson Stars was designed by Ben Lunato. I came across it on Reddit several years ago. I downloaded it as a zip file and then let it sit on my hard drive for at least 2 years or so before I finally booted it up. When I did, I got about 20 minutes into the game. I attempted to pause it, but didn't realize that hitting the escape key would immediately close the application entirely. And then after a bit of deliberating over whether or not what I had experienced so far had been worthwhile enough to immediately experience again, I launched the game for a second time and completed it in about 90 minutes. The Steam page for Beyond Crimson Stars describes it as a explorable narrative game, which is both satirical and heartfelt, and will take the player on a spiritual journey to the very limits of what is possible in video games. Whether or not this is an honest statement from the dev or a bit of intentional hyperbole, the game definitely does take the player on a journey. For several weeks after finishing the game, a lot of the imagery and ideas in it stuck with me, which is something that happens whenever I experience effective art. I was curious how other people felt about the game, but aside from Steam reviews, I couldn't really find any discussion on it, or even a video review of the game, despite there being a channel called Review Game that uploaded a Beyond Crimson Stars video. There's a handful of gameplay videos on YouTube, all of which boast their lack of commentary, and the one gameplay video I could find that does contain commentary is super cringe, and it was uploaded by someone who didn't appear to have any patience for the game.
Oh, welcome to Beyond Crimson Stars? If it makes it shut the fuck up, then yes! Yes, it can.
If you haven't yet played the game, but you're interested in doing so, I'd recommend stopping this video and then going to one of the links down below in the description to check it out. Like I said, it takes around an hour and change to complete, and you can get it for $1 on Steam or for free over on itch.io. The rest of the video will contain spoilers, so proceed with caution. On its surface, Beyond Crimson Stars should feel familiar to gamers. You have a first-person perspective, you move with WASD, and you look around with your mouse. Beyond that, there are no other immediately obvious game mechanics. I did read in a Steam review that you can hit the equal sign key to move faster, but not doing so didn't at all detract from my enjoyment of the game. In some ways, the game feels like an amusement park dark ride. The game isn't on rails, you're free to explore to a degree, but walking through environments will trigger scripted sequences, most of which are narrated by the Minute Hour, who, for the past 7 or so years, has been regularly uploading a series of offbeat spoken word pieces that kinda bridge the gap between a traditional David Sedaris-style humorist and the absurdist, effects-heavy comedy of Longmont Potion Castle. In the game, the player appears to take on the role of the Sun, portrayed by YouTube's very own Taxpayer Money.
I'm thinking of becoming homeless.
The Sun has recently lost his father to suicide, and he takes what's left of his father's brain to a sketchy booth in the mall, which offers a service that essentially allows one to explore someone's memories through an interactive brain map. The memories that you explore are intimate and fragmented, and they play out across 4 vignettes, each accessed through a different colored tunnel. At this point, it's unclear to me just who you are in the game, as your perspective seems to shift freely from that of the son narrating some scenes to the father or different parts of the father's psyche. Personally, I interpret this as you being all of these things at once. You're the son, exploring what's left of your father's damaged brain. The past and present, vague memories, and imagined scenarios will all overlap one another in a way that makes it feel irrelevant to think too deeply about what's real, because it's all on a level playing field at this point. I'm not sure if there's an intended order to these vignettes that I mentioned, but the first area that I explored had me going down a blue tunnel, where I found myself interacting with an AI that aspires to be an artist.
You're awake. You're awake. It must be my lucky day because you're awake. You're awake, buddy. Aren't you excited? Oh my gosh, you've been in hypersleep for, well, I'm not even really supposed to tell you, but it's been a long time. A really long time.
The AI presents a series of works seeking a reaction from you, but you remain silent.
Slithered round, not making a sound, not making a sound. When one day the snake slithered up a tree and thought to himself, this is what I should be. Yes, I, this snake, should more like be this tree, not slithering round, but planting a seed.
Over time, the AI begins to question if something is wrong with your brain, and in an increasingly aggressive series of actions, it attempts to push you toward suicide. This vignette, along with all of the others, does lend itself to some interpretation from the player. I think that the AI could represent the father's desire to express himself, and the fact that the AI doesn't really get a satisfactory reaction to its art could be saying something about the father's inability to accurately or openly express himself in life, which may have played an important part in the manner in which he died. While looking over Steam reviews for the game, I noticed that this section in particular seemed to annoy some people, to the point that they didn't really want to experience the rest of the game.
I'm just gonna end it here, I guess, and hope the game saves. If not, and it doesn't save, and it wants me to replay the robot zone again, I'm just not gonna play the game again, so I'm hoping there's a save mechanic.
While the AI is kind of annoying, it's somewhat similar to Claptrap from Borderlands. I think that the incessant talking and nagging that slowly turns into demands for self-harm is a fairly effective representation of dealing with intrusive thoughts. And in the context of the story, it feels very fitting. The next vignette appears at the end of the Teal Tunnel, and sees the son in what I assume is some sort of juvenile detention facility. Audio cues here suggest another shift in perspective, as we go from one side of the glass to the other before walking away.
I didn't want you to come. I told you not to. You don't listen. You don't do anything.
I don't need you to cry or say how you're such a bad dad. Looks like I'm gonna fuck up my life just as much as you.
What follows is one of the more upsetting scenes in the game, and it focuses on this youth. Now, whether or not this youth is the father, the son, or just a hypothetical entity in the father's memories isn't made totally clear, but this youth goes through a series of scenes that see them forced to confront the looming shift into adulthood, while at the same time being fairly immersed in the sort of recklessness and nihilism that so many teens experience.
I've thought about this. We should the school. We should the school. We fucking the motherfucking school. We fucking the motherfucking school.
What a teen does with these feelings and urges can often dictate how the rest of their life will go. And in our scenario here, we see both the suggestion of and the aftermath of a school shooting. This scene is abstract and entirely void of any actual violence, but it's still very effective in illustrating the emotions, urges, and fantasies that many young people experience while on the precipice of entering adulthood. And again, in the context of exploring the fractured mindscape of a person who took their own life, this scene feels very fitting rather than just a hollow attempt to shock the player. Next up, I entered the Red Tunnel, and this area has the player explore a desolate red environment with whistling winds, the sound of the tide moving in and out, and faint moans in the distance. You walk through what feels like a futuristic graveyard and proceed across a strange highway, flanked by large, statue-like figures that yell at you as you approach them and explode as you walk past them. This area provided me a time of uneasy introspection after the previous vignette, but even though it was relatively much more calm than that last scenario, it wasn't at all welcoming or relaxed. The father's violent ideations are never too far from you. As you exit this area, the son shares a memory, triggered by the sound of the sea.
This place is unfamiliar, but I recognize it. The sound of the sea is so loud, it's all I can hear. It's all that reminds me of him. My father would only ever drink one beer. I remember that so clearly. The no AC cat piss summer evenings, watching me playing games, made me think of my mother too. I don't remember her so well.
The Green Tunnel was the last one that I visited, and this is where the walking sim vibes of the game were most apparent to me. you slowly progress through what looks like a ruined cityscape with an eclipsed sun in the sky and tense music punctuating every step. It reminded me of the Black Rock Quarry from Control, but much more hopeless and uninviting. After a time, an intense monologue is triggered, which transitions abruptly to what looks like a television studio, which abruptly transitions again to a series of audio clips discussing the declining health and eventual death of the father's wife and the mother of the son. And we learned that her death had a troubling effect on the behavior of the son. As this scene ends, the son speaks.
I never really knew what he was writing. He read some of it to me once or twice, but I was busy trying not to say the wrong thing. I never listened. I don't know if that was one of his books or if he was thinking about it at the end. So much seems to have been lost.
To me, the son's statement here about never really listening to or knowing how to respond to the father sharing his writing mirrors that first vignette I experienced, with the AI trying to share some of its writing. The further you go into the story, the more you're able to form a picture of who this man was. Whether or not that picture is accurate is impossible to say, but the culmination of your experiences here through these 4 vignettes will inform the decision that you're asked to make at the end of the game. As you exit each scenario, you wind up back in the main hub, and you'll see that the tunnel you had previously entered will now be inaccessible. Once you've gone through all 4 tunnels, you ascend to a white tunnel, which brings you to a new part of your father's mind, and in this area he speaks directly to you, reminiscing on his relationship to you and his failures.
When you were a little boy, you cut your knee. And it wasn't too bad, but the look in your eyes terrified me. I knew your hair was going to turn gray, and high school was just a few years away. I couldn't protect you from that look then. But now you have a choice. You have a choice to make. You can stay. We can do it all again, but better. We can build cities. We can make mankind never let anyone go hungry. We will make the world perfect forever.
He offers 2 different paths, one that will allow you to stay with him forever and rebuild and be able to do everything over again, but with the benefit of hindsight. Or you can leave and go back to your own life. Left you stay, right you go back. The path to these doors gives you some time to ponder your choice, and ultimately, I chose to stay, and I experienced this.
We did it, son! We will be kings! We will go back to the start and make it better! Son, we will make everything not hurt anymore! Make everything beautiful! I'll bring her back! I'll bring her back! And we will build a better world than ours ever was! Son, I love you! And we have so much work to do!
So, did I make the right choice? Well, I immediately felt like I chose wrong, and I fell for the illusion offered by an echo of my father's voice. If you choose to leave, the ending is quite a bit different, and I'll show you some of that right here.
Can I have this mic on?
Thank you. Something makes you feel like life was better once upon a time. Once upon a time, the king looked over his kingdom with his noble son and his loving queen. And when the queen fell ill, the prince rode off looking for a cure. He slayed dragons and braved mountain tops and jungles, but he found nothing that could help his mother. And more than that, he had no way of returning to the kingdom and his grieving father, for the queen was no longer with us. The son was lost in the wilderness, and the kingdom fell to the weeds as the king mourned for the rest of his days. Maybe there is no room in this modern life for kings and princes.
Either way, the choice you make is your own, and you're led to believe that your father supports that choice. There's no credit roll or return to a main menu. Once your time with the game is complete, you hit escape, and that's that. I've said it enough times, but the story here in Beyond Crimson Stars is effective. My main criticisms of the game come from being frustrated with some of the choices made here. For instance, the game opens up with this scene. I realized too late that this is how you choose the graphics settings for the game. And so my first attempt at capturing footage looked like this. The game does have controller support, but hitting start on the controller is the same as hitting the escape key, which is frustrating for a game that doesn't offer any way to save or pick back up where you left off. It honestly feels a bit hostile toward the player, demanding that the entire experience be experienced in one sitting. And I do believe that's the best and only way to play something like this, but the possibility of brushing the start button and losing all of your progress is fairly likely. And there are a few players online who mentioned not really feeling motivated to go back in after doing so, which almost happened to me, and it was really just on a whim that I decided to go back and actually finish the game. I'm glad that I did, but I can't really blame someone for being too frustrated to carry on if they were to accidentally shut it down in the middle of the story. I also saw some reviews mention that at times the game was so dark that it became difficult to navigate. I did experience that darkness, but personally I really liked it. I don't mind feeling along the walls and looking at a faint light off in the distance when a section like that only lasts for a minute or two. I did experience some navigational frustrations in another section of the game, but my desire to see how the story would resolve pushed me to figure it out, but I gotta admit I was stuck for like 20 minutes on this part, and it was super frustrating. However, those are really minor gripes, and they're heavily outweighed by all of the positive feelings that I have toward the game. I decided to reach out to Ben Lunato, the developer of Beyond Crimson Stars, to get a bit more insight on the game and some of the motivations behind it. He's created several other games in a similar explorable narrative style. So my first question was, what attracts him to creating that type of game?
My first encountering of these sort of narrative forms in games, and this sort of deep narrative, as one might call it, is probably something like playing Halo Forge maps, where a base was created or a defense point against aliens or something, and rather than loading in with your friends, you've just opened it up on your own and has this big implied narrative. It has this space to explore, it has these things that imply things, it has this tonality, and it's a familiar space, but it's been altered in this sort of narrative way with the tools available. And I think as well in Minecraft, the sort of early days of adventure maps where they didn't have puzzles or mechanics, and it really was just someone had made a big village and there were some chests in there and you had to do some jumping puzzles, and it was this big implied narrative. It was this a few signposts, a few things, and it's this sort of playfulness with a player where it sort of trusts the player and needs the player to bring their intellect and bring their own creative spark to the game, and that's going to bring it alive and actually make it a worthwhile experience. In a way, not being a passive player through mechanics, but instead not being a passive player through consciously cognitive interaction with the material of the game and the world, and actually like striving to understand things and explore things and think about things. I think also at the time I was getting my degree in games design, it was a big moment for these walk 'em up games. Dear Esther had come out shortly before I went to university, and at university A Machine for Pigs came out, which was a sort of instrumental game for me. It was very impacting. It sort of demonstrated the complete disdain for mechanics and difficulty and everything in exchange for pure thematic elements that really hit me hard and really asked me to explore questions that I found fascinating, and did so in an environment and a world which I really wasn't used to, without the sort of mechanical abstraction or the mechanical difficulties that come with sort of modern AAA titles. Whereas these games are exploring, and these narrative games, if you want to call them that, are exploring things, and they're cutting away everything that's not necessary, or cutting away things that would detract, or cutting away things that would detract even in development time. I feel like most games with mechanics, I know what the mechanic is. I've played games before. I'm not a child. I know what climbing up a tower is to light up a beacon. I know what collecting coins is like. I know what all this stuff is like, and they're putting it in the game because that's what people expect. That's what the publishers want. That's what the guys in the suits want. But in fact, it has nothing to do with the gameplay. It has nothing to do with the themes, and it really shouldn't belong in an adult medium, most of this stuff. Not to say mechanics don't, obviously, but I think that you need mechanics that actually serve the game. You don't need mechanics that tick the box on the shelf. And unfortunately, I think that's what 99% of mechanics do these days, and have done for a long time. I think as well, when I was at university, the sort of games, the game discussion as well was very based in this Stanley Parable meta world, where the sort of the talk of what if the only way to win is to turn the game off, that sort of stuff. And also the beginner's guide came out while I was at university, and it's easily my maybe my favorite game, and is a sort of, for me, like a genre defining piece of media that really showed me what I wanted to make, what I thought games would be, what I thought I could be as a game developer. And that is a walk 'em up narrative game, no choices, room to room dialogue. And I just think that unless you've got something mechanical to tell, you shouldn't be putting mechanics in your game.
Beyond Crimson Stars features music from an artist who now goes by Negative XP, but at the time was going by the name School Shooter. If you try to look this person up, one of the top results is a listing for him on an Antifa website, which attempts to illustrate his connection to the extreme right. The site also doxes him, showing pictures of his home and vehicle, and urges readers of the site to try and find out what church his family might attend, which I think really oversteps a lot of common sense boundaries. Alan Kim is the name of the solo musician behind Negative XP. Regardless of whatever his actual political affiliations or beliefs might be, his internet presence, along with some of the art he's made, precede him and put him into the category of edgy internet musician. Because the internet is the way it is, I've often had a hard time differentiating between someone who uses edgy imagery for the sake of entertainment and someone who is actually on a crusade for some kind of ethnic cleansing. I've personally had some of my art misinterpreted and been on the receiving end of some very harsh accusations, and I've seen enough internet arguments to know that irony can easily be lost on a lot of people. So, given the unpredictability of the responses you might receive for using, for lack of a better term, edgy elements in your art, I wanted to ask Ben how he felt about using things like music by Negative XP or a school shooting scene in his game.
Working with Negative XP was a joy and a pleasure. He's always incredibly accommodating. I've worked with him on a few projects, but this was the first and perhaps the best use of his music in my work. It was a sort of a great collaboration. and he basically let me have access to anything I wanted, and I built a full sequence around one of his songs and another sequence with one of his songs sort of chopped up. I think that his interaction with Antifa, these other groups, I think there's an element where it's just Coke versus New Coke. It's very productized and marketized, and they know what their audience is, and he knows what his audience is, and they need to perform these warring roles with each other. And it makes both of them money and makes both sides a little bit internet famous. But I think it is obviously a shame to be harassed and dogged. But in the end, Negative XP is the one creating the good art. Negative XP is the one who's a Christian, and he's a good person. So what's the point in he could be lynched tomorrow. It wouldn't change a thing. He's still going to heaven. So it doesn't. It's a shame, but he's still got his bank accounts and stuff, I think. So maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but he's doing fine. So I think there's a few things with edginess. I think if something's deemed as edgy, first of all, it's sort of it's proclamated as being relevant. It's proclamated as being in some way alive in the culture. If something is edgy, it means it's not a moribund discord. It means it's a real tangible topic of discussion which will evoke people's emotions and feelings. So it's something that's important. I think again, this sort of focus on edginess is almost like the Kurt Vonnegut cheesiness. If something is cheesy, it's because it's been said so many times before that it's become cheesy, and the reason it's been said so many times before is because it has some element of truth. People want to say this thing to each other, people want to say it, and this edginess thing has the same elemental power to it. I think that's the reason why it's a focus of mine, but it's not a gigantic focus of mine. But I think also you drift into that if you're looking for these sort of big statements, which I'm looking for in most of my games, which are supposed to be big indie darling proclamations, statement pieces, or fully holistic masterpieces. They're supposed to be a full complete thing. It's easier to draw that from these sort of abstractions, or draw them from these big events and draw out this meaningful nugget from this big powerful thing. Also, if you are a solo developer, if you are struggling, if you don't have a big team, it's much easier to have a school shooting than it is to have a 20-minute action sequence or something. It's a much quicker way to cut to something and have a big impact. And if you're and if you need sledgehammers, if you need something that's big and to get people's attention and fuck people up, it's better to go for these big things, rather than I want to play with the big toys. I don't want to play around with ex-girlfriends and stealing someone's dog. I want the big boy topics. So I don't know, I think this is a bit off topic, but the school shooting in the game as well is not really a school shooting. I think it's a very complex sequence that doesn't really explain itself or care to explain itself, but it's much more about this sort of this abyss of ending childhood and going into adulthood, this idea that that's the only point in your life where you can actually do a school shooting. After that, it becomes absurd to do a school shooting. So it's like this reckless absurdity of youth that's going into forcing to accept adulthood, and it's this sort of like cosmic nightmare of reality as well. And also, during the sequence, the player isn't actually involved in a school shooting. It's all imagined. It's all heard on the radio. It's all about a father overcoming this childhood feeling and it being passed down to a son. This constant reminder that it's all kind of worthless and useless, and everyone around you is just as lost and confused as you are. So yeah, it's not really an edgy school shooting sequence is kind of an edgy school shooting sequence that's being paraded up around this idea of like only love can kill the demon, only these sort of pithy connections, or these family connections, or these connections to yourself or to other people can spare you from this sort of delinquent disconnected fate of hurting people or hurting yourself.
I want to thank Ben for taking the time to answer my questions, and if you'd like to know more about what he's working on, I've included some links below this video. He currently has an NFT project on the Near network called Joyriders that has some pretty sick artwork attached to it. And that's about all for today, but before I go, I'd like to ask, have you played Beyond Crimson Stars? Do you have a favorite walking sim or art game, something that breaks out of the norm to deliver a truly unique experience? If you liked this video, hit like, leave us a comment, and subscribe for new videos all week long. We now have a Patreon if you'd like to support the channel further, and we're using those funds to improve the quality and quantity of the videos we make. Until next time, see ya!